Okay, this is Math 2, Unit 11, Lesson 4. That's Math 2, 11.4 notes. And the title is Quadratic Formula. All right, first things first, we're going to talk about the quadratic equation. What is the quadratic equations? Quadratics are the formulas that we've been working with since last unit. It's the parabola functions. And they look like this. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. There's many different ways of writing them. There's different forms. This is the standard form. We've been talking about this for some time. Ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay. How are we going to use this, or how are we going to use the quadratic formula? So let's write that down, quadratic formula. This is just another method used to solve quadratic equations. So far, to solve quadratic equations, we've factored, we've done complete the square, we've moved things to other sides, square rooted both sides. There's been a number of ways we've solved, but sometimes none of those methods would work, or they're too complicated to work through, and so we choose the quadratic formula. And this is the new part. Here it is. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay. If you look online, there's a ton of videos where people sing this to different tunes. Most common one is Pop Goes the Weasel, and it goes like this. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. However you choose to memorize it, you do need to have this memorized eventually. Okay. We are going to, first one we're going to do is review. Let's review first. Number one, review. We are going to solve by completing the square. Okay. X squared plus 8x minus 3 equals 0. X squared plus 8x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, solve by completing the square. We're going to add the 3 to the other side. Gone. X squared plus 8x plus blank equals 0 plus 3 is 3 plus blank. And then we take the 8. What do we do with it? Cut it in half and then square it. 8 cut in half is 4. 4 times 4 is 16. And we add 16 to the other side. And that gives me 19, and then I double bubble here. Remember, the last sign here is always going to be positive, which means they're going to be the same. The neighbor in this one tells me they are both positive, and the two numbers have to be the same, so it's going to be 4 and 4. 4 times 4 is 16, and adds up to 8x in the middle. So I'm going to write this as the quantity of x plus 4 squared equals 19. Now, since I'm solving, this is not where I'm going to move the 19 over. I'm going to leave the 19 where it's at and square root both sides. Plus or minus. Undo. Undo. X plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 19. And 19 is not a perfect square, and no factors come out. There's no pairs. So I'm going to subtract the 4. Subtract the 4. X equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 19. And since 19 is in a radical and it's not a perfect squared, there are no like terms. This here is your final answer. Negative 4 plus or minus root 19. Okay? That there is review. Number 2, we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to, not the same thing, the same problem, but solve by using the quadratic formula. solve using the quadratic formula. Okay, so we're going to do the same problem. X squared plus 8x minus 3 equals 0, and see if we come up with the same answer. We should. We're going to work it through. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. First thing I'd like you to do is always label what your a, b's, and c's are. In order to find that, it has to equal 0. So if it doesn't equal 0, move everything over. It already equals 0, so we're good. A is the leading coefficient in front of the x squared. You can see it's always the leading coefficient. That's 1. B is always the number in front of your x. That's 8. And it is possible for B or C to be 0, never A. C is your constant, the number at the end, and that is negative 3. So A is 1, B is 8, C is negative 3. Okay, here's what we're going to do. X equals, we're just going to kind of set up the skeleton, and you will have one on the quiz and the test where you have to set the skeleton up just like this. Well, they give it to you, and you have to fill it in. Blank squared minus 4 blank blank all over 2 blank. Okay, so how does this work? We're going to fill everything in. Okay, opposite of B, B is 8, so 8's going in. B squared, B is 8, so 8 is going in again. Minus 4, and then A is 1. C is negative 3. All over 2 times A is 1. Okay, X equals, opposite of 8 is negative 8, plus or minus the square root of. 8 times 8 is 64. 4 times 1 is 1, times negative 3 is 12, but be careful with your signs. A negative times a negative is going to give me a positive. So it was minus originally, but that negative 3 with that negative 4 made it a positive 12. All over 2. X equals negative 8 plus or minus the square root of. 64 plus 12 is 76. All over 2. Now, as tempting as it is, you cannot reduce those. You cannot, because this whole thing is together, and you can only reduce if you can reduce all three, the negative 8, the radical 76, and the 2. And you cannot reduce this right now, so don't try. Leave it like this for now. We're not done, but for now that's how it's going to stay. Okay, what can we do? The 76 is not a perfect square, but it can be broken down into factors, prime factors. So that's 2 and 38. And 38 is 2 and 19. So I have 2, 2, and a 19. The 2 is what's coming out. So I have negative 8 plus or minus this. Let me fix that. Plus or minus the square root of 76 becomes the 2 coming out, root 19 all over 2. Okay, root 76 became 2 root 19. Do you see that? Root 76 is 2 root 19. And now we can reduce, because I can reduce the 8, the 2, and the 2. I can divide them all by 2. If that 2 there was, say, a 3, I wouldn't be able to reduce. But since it's a 2, I can. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. Plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1. I'm just going to put root 19 over 2 divided by 2 is 1. So negative 4 plus or minus root 19, which is indeed the same answer we got earlier here. Okay, so same answer. Some of you may be thinking, why in the world would I do it this way when this other way is so much easier? There are certain problems where the quadratic formula works out nicer. For example, if that 8 were a 9 and you went to cut in half and square it, it can be done, but it's a little more complicated. If the leading coefficient is not 1, same concept. It's a little bit harder. It can be done, but it's more complicated. So it just depends on the problem. You will have some on the test where you're forced to do it this way. You will have some on the test where you're forced to do it this way, and you'll have some on the test where you get to pick. Pick the method that works best for you. Okay, let's try another one. We're going to do a quadratic formula. Number 3. Okay, so we're going to do this one quadratic formula way. 2x squared minus 7x plus, nope, that's equals 7x plus 1. And we're going to solve, and again, we're using the quadratic formula. Okay, so I said previously it has to equal 0, and if it doesn't, you have to make it equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 7x, 2x squared. 7x and 2x squared are not like terms, so I'm just going to write them next to each other, equals 1. I cannot subtract them because that has a squared and that does not. And then I'm going to subtract the 1. And again, the 1 is not a like term with either one of these two terms, so it's going to be 2x squared minus 7x minus 1 equals 0. Got it? Because none of them are like terms, so it's 2x squared minus 7x minus 1 equals 0. Okay, what is A? What is B? What is C? A is 2, B is negative 7, and C is negative 1. X equals negative blank plus or minus the square root of blank squared minus, and I'm going to just put blank, 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 and see if you can remember all of the numbers over blank, blank. Okay, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I'm just going to fill the 4 and the 2 in first because these numbers are not coming from my ABC. This is just from the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So the 4 and the 2 are already in the formula. Okay, we're going to fill everything else in. Negative b would be negative of negative 7, and then negative 7 goes in here as well. 4ac would be 2 and negative 1, and then 2a would be 2 times 2. Okay, I have opposite of negative 7 is positive 7, plus or minus the square root of, remember when you square a negative it is positive. Negative 7 times negative 7 is positive 49, 4 times 2 times 1 is 8, and a negative, a positive, and a negative is going to make a positive all over 4. 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 plus 8 is 57 all over 4. Nothing reduces. Don't change yours, but I'm going to change mine quickly. Pretend this was an 8. Kids do try to reduce that. Remember, you cannot reduce unless there were a number here like a 2 or a 12 or something where you could reduce all 3. You cannot reduce unless you can reduce all 3. So I'm going to put a 8 here. If there were an 8 and it's tempting to reduce that, you still can't because it doesn't reduce with the 7. So be careful with your reducing, and we'll do more when I do the some of the worksheet problems with you. So this is your answer. X equals 7 plus or minus root 57 over 4. And a really quick side note that I did not talk about in the beginning, and I should have, is this one right here. When I told you to use quadratic formula, but even if I hadn't, I said you choose any method. This is not one where you would want to complete the square. You can, but it's going to be very complicated, and I would not suggest it. I would not personally want to do it either. If I were solving this and I had a choice, I would choose quadratic formula. It would be a lot easier than completing the square. Okay, that is it for this lesson.